Welcome to this explainer. Now, I want you to imagine, just for a second, the eternal Son of God actually entering human history. You'd probably expect that instead of arriving quietly, he'd just immediately split the skies wide open and summon legions of angels, right? But he doesn't. Instead, he spends decades in total quiet obscurity. Today, we're exploring the Carpenter who built reality, the terrifyingly beautiful, ordinary life of Jesus. It is a mind-boggling paradox that the God of the universe spent around 30 years of his earthly life doing, well, almost no public miracles. Okay, let's dive into this. Look at this question from John chapter 1, verse 46. Can any good thing come out of Nazareth? Honestly, it's Scripture's version of a very public roast. Nathanael is essentially saying, seriously? That place? You've got to be kidding me. There's this profound, almost comedic absurdity here. You have Nathanael mocking this tiny, completely insignificant backwater town while heaven has already decreed it the very birthplace of human salvation. Heaven's answer to his sarcastic little joke is a resounding, yes, salvation, actually. But to truly grasp the sheer, overwhelming scale of what is happening in that small town, we absolutely have to look at Colossians chapter 1, verses 16 through 17. It says, "For in him were all things created, and in him all things consist." That phrase right there, all things consist, literally means all things hold together in him. Christ wasn't just casually hanging around at creation, he actively sustains reality itself. I mean, think about it. Gravity continues to function entirely because Christ wills it. Stars burn because Christ upholds them. Right this very second, your lungs function because the sun is sustaining creation, moment by moment. Now take that cosmic, universe-sustaining power and combine it with Mark chapter 6, verse 3. Is not this the carpenter? The juxtaposition here is absolutely staggering. The very architect of the human nervous system was swinging a hammer. The mind that literally invented cedar trees was cutting cedar trees. Think about it. Imagine someone casually walking up, ordering a table from Jesus, completely unaware that the person measuring the wood is the very mind that invented mathematics. That is the absolute insanity of the incarnation. Jesus spent years making ordinary objects while simultaneously sustaining extraordinary reality. Let's move on and see how this builds in Luke chapter 2, verse 52. And Jesus advanced in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and men. This verse is quietly explosive. It tells us that the eternal Son of God didn't somehow cease being divine, but in his humanity, he genuinely developed. He had to learn language. He learned physical coordination. He actually had to learn his trade skills. The one who authored human growth entirely actually entered human growth. And this brilliantly illustrates the ultimate paradox. On one side, we have the sovereign God who told the oceans exactly where to stop, as declared in Job chapter 38, verse 11. But on the other side, we have a toddler who fell while learning to walk. And here's the thing, he didn't fall because he lacked divinity. He fell because he embraced true humanity. This isn't some 50-50 split, it's not a hybrid, and it's certainly not God just wearing a human costume. It is the breathtaking union of fully God and fully man. Which brings us right to the bedrock truth found in John chapter 1, verse 14, and the Word became flesh. Notice that phrasing very carefully. It's not pretended to be flesh, not appeared like flesh. He became flesh. This means true Christianity is absolutely not about a distant God safely shouting instructions down from heaven. No, it's about a God who intimately and lovingly steps right down into the dust of our reality. This leads us to such a fascinating parallel. The Bible begins in a garden with the first Adam. Surrounded by total perfection, peace, and abundance, Adam fails, essentially saying, my will over God's. But then, Jesus enters another garden, Gethsemane. Surrounded by crushing sorrow, betrayal, and approaching divine wrath, Jesus says in Matthew chapter 26, verse 39, not as I will, but as thou wilt. Paul explicitly calls Jesus the last Adam in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 45. The first Adam brought death through disobedience, but the last Adam brings life through perfect obedience. The symmetry here is just incredible. Adam failed regarding a tree in the garden. Jesus, however, triumphs on a tree, as Paul points out in Galatians chapter 3, verse 13. The entire biblical story turns right on this pivot. Since the dawn of time, humanity has constantly tried reaching upward, attempting to climb up and become like God. But the gospel reveals the profound, humbling reality that God comes downward, becoming man to redeem us. Now, when this God-man eventually does step into public ministry, we start seeing miracles.
But you have to understand, these aren't isolated magic tricks meant to entertain a crowd. They are profound signs. For example, Psalm 107, verse 29, says of Yahweh, "He maketh the storm a calm." Then, in Mark chapter 4, verse 39, Jesus stands up in a wildly tossing boat and tells the sea to just sit down and be quiet. And the sea obeys him instantly. He is doing exactly what only Yahweh does in the Psalms.
Which naturally prompts the absolutely terrified disciples to ask in Mark chapter 4, verse 41, "Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him?" This right here is the driving question of the entire gospel narrative. We have to stop asking merely, "Hey, can he improve my life?" and instead ask the far more terrifying and glorious question, who exactly is standing in this boat? And sometimes the answer to that question creates some very awkward moments. In Mark chapter 2, 4 friends literally rip open a roof to lower a paralyzed man down to Jesus. Everyone in that room is expecting a physical healing. I mean, they didn't tear apart a guy's house for a theology lecture, right? But Jesus looks at the man and says in Mark chapter 2, verse 5, "Son, thy sins are forgiven." Just imagine the awkward silence in that room. But Jesus is doing something highly intentional. He's bypassing their immediate desire for temporary relief to target humanity's deepest, truest horror, sin. Modern people love to think our biggest problem is a lack of fulfillment. Jesus disagrees completely. Make no mistake, physical suffering absolutely matters to him. He cares deeply about it, and he heals constantly. But bodily healing without reconciliation to God is only temporary. Remember, even Lazarus was raised from the dead eventually to die again. Christ came for something infinitely bigger than temporary relief. He came to defeat sin itself. That is precisely why Christianity isn't built on inspirational speeches or some vague, feel-good spirituality. It is built on the cross. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 23 boldly declares, "We preach Christ crucified." The cross is the absolute center of human history. It is the exact, singular place where perfect divine justice and perfect divine mercy collide, completely fulfilling and satisfying both without compromising either one. And if you want to know who orchestrated this magnificent rescue, we just look to what might be the most staggering truth Jesus ever uttered. In John chapter 14, verse 9, he says, "He that had seen me had seen the Father." This is enormous. He isn't just saying, "Hey, I represent God pretty well." He's declaring, if you want to know what God is like, look at me. He is not God's assistant. As Hebrews chapter 1, verse 3 declares, he's the exact revelation of his nature. Want to know how God handles the broken? Watch Jesus. Yet, knowing this makes the gospel accounts almost comical at times when it comes to human pride. People constantly think they are evaluating Jesus, when in reality they are actually just revealing their own utter foolishness. Look at Pilate. Pilate sits on his fancy throne, genuinely believing he is judging Jesus. Meanwhile, as John chapter 5, verse 22 tells us, Jesus is the appointed judge of the entire world. Pilate is literally judging his own judge. It's wild. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is our constant human tendency to want way less than what God actually offers. The crowds just want a free meal. They want physical bread. But in John chapter 6, verse 35, Jesus offers himself as the bread of life. Humanity constantly tries to shrink Jesus down into manageable little categories. A great teacher, a life coach, maybe a political revolutionary. But Scripture just keeps blowing up those boxes. He proves over and over to be the very hinge of history itself. And yet, this hinge of history didn't just redeem the dramatic, spectacular moments. No. He spent the vast majority of his life redeeming the completely ordinary. Just look at this. Work, fatigue, waiting, family life, learning, friendship, and sorrow. By living a normal human life, Jesus actually subjected himself to the exact same daily grind that we all experience every single day. So, the crucial point is this. Those 30 hidden years in Nazareth were not wasted years. They were holy years. We can take this massive cosmic reality of the incarnation and bring it right down to our personal, daily lives. The Son of God literally sanctified ordinary existence by fully entering into it himself. Because of him, the mundane is no longer meaningless. Through his perfectly lived ordinary life, his sacrificial death, and his glorious resurrection, this carpenter from Nazareth opened the way. He made it possible for ordinary, broken people like us to become the very children of God, simply through faith. not through our own moral perfection, but through union with him. He was never merely a tradesman from an insignificant town. As 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 24 proclaims, he was and forever is Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God.
This explainer has been a summary discussion of a profoundly deep and beautiful reality. But it leaves us with the ultimate question. If the architect of the universe was willing to step right into the sawdust of Nazareth for you, how will you respond to him today? There's so much more to uncover on this, and I highly encourage you to explore further. We've got a link to the fuller discussion right down in the description below. Dive in, keep learning, and as always, thank you so much for exploring with me today.